Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Black Health Trust. My name is Dr. Ivan Walks, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jocelyn Hines, our founder and chairperson, Dr. Randall Maxey. Our other co-moderator, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, will be joining us later. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the boss, Dr. Maxey.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, I should say, rather. I thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for what I think is going to be an exciting session. We have our resident, is the word Dr. Walls called wonderkin? When somebody is wonderful, knowledgeable, brilliant, and young, is that what they call them?
That's what they call them until they reach about age 18. I think Dr. Despani is over 18 now.
Oh, okay.
We just have to just call him brilliant.
Okay, we have Dr. Despani with us. And I appreciate you and Dr. Hines and Dr. Neighbor Stevens for joining us. So we're going to start this without any further ado. Simon, can you pull up the first set of slides, please? So I want to do this slightly different. And I'm going to need your and Dr. Hines' assistance in reading these slides, only because I have some difficulty with that. Okay, so we do live in a violent world, and everybody knows about the war in Ukraine, which has heightened fears about nuclear exposure and interest in iodine pills that can help protect the body from some radiation. But potassium iodide doesn't protect against other kinds of radioactive threats, like a nuclear bomb, for example, which can release many different kinds of radiation. Next slide, Simon. So according to health authorities, the bottom line of this slide is you don't need to stock up on potassium iodide, but you need to know about it. But we do need to know that things are going on in the world that threaten us, but don't take any false pills of people trying to load you up with something that has major side effects. Let's have the next slide. Now, this slide is important probably only to me. I'm a coffee drinker. Coffee is one of the healthiest things you can put in your body. In fact, some studies found that people who drink coffee have a healthier heart, healthier blood sugar, and can even help you lose weight. It's one thing that counteracts all the health benefits of coffee, and that is adding cream. And cream messes up that coffee. So coffee is good because it has polyphenols, which can help activate a host of benefits in your body, including weight loss and digestive benefits. Next slide. There are some alternatives to cream. Most of those things out there, the almond milk creamers, etc., don't do your body any good. They have lecithins. But there's one thing that does help, coconut milk. And coconut milk has MCT oils. And I think Dr. Sherrod and Dr. Jazzy Jordan mentioned that in our session last week. Next slide. So in a study that was published last month in JAMA called Neurology, and they looked at more than 1,500 participants of Black adults. And they found that even when they were in their mid-50s, they tend to have an acceleration of white matter disease in their brain or increased aging that could happen. And the authors did suggest that social forces might play a part in accelerated brain aging, and among Black subjects in particular. The study says that there's an effect called the weathering hypothesis, that's an appropriate name, which states that chronic exposure to social and economic disadvantage leads to accelerated decline in physical health, outcomes, and brain health outcomes. Next slide. So the real thing is that we need to be cool, that stress, diabetes, hypertension, and racism can all cause decline in your cognitive abilities. Next slide. So Dr. Walks, you're the best introducer. Can you introduce the famous, brilliant Dr. Jordan Despani?
Of course, Dr. Maxey, it is always a joy to have Dr. Despani join us. As Dr. Maxey did mention earlier, Dr. Despani, and tried to give him the Wonderkind title. I think most people who are given that title would rather just have us say that they are absolutely brilliant and absolutely willing. Dr. Despani shares his time with us here on the Black Health Trust. He is a noted virologist. Dr. Despani is a business person. He's an entrepreneur, and and I think he's my friend more than Dr. Maxey's friend. I think Dr. Maxey and I like to debate that. So with no further ado, I would love to introduce again to Black Health Trust, Dr. Jordan Despani.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I guess we are reconvening after some time, precisely because, yeah, there is a literal onslaught of viruses that are just inundating all of us, right? I mean, in prior talks, I have discussed the fears of a syndemic, which in the media is colloquially called a triple-demic. And although I was wary of engaging in what could be misconstrued as fear-mongering, I am always focused on empowering the Black Health Trust to have knowledge that they can act on before something goes wrong, right? So the reality is that whenever COVID-19 was actually bursting onto the scene in 2020 and then 2021, what happened is that we saw almost an inverse relationship. And by that, I mean just that as one thing goes up, the other thing goes down, right? And what we're seeing is that precisely because SARS coronavirus 2 was so contagious, it actually was outcompeting, for instance, respiratory syncytial virus, influenza viruses A and B, and another follow-on effect of that was the reality that the I guess social protections that we were putting in place, such as masking and social distancing and so forth and so on, that also played a role in not only mitigating the most deleterious consequences of SARS coronavirus 2, but it was also having an impact on those other respiratory viruses as well. Because again, at the end of the day, all of these viruses, at least those that are respiratory, like again, respiratory syncytial virus, influenza virus, adenovirus, SARS coronavirus 2, they're all trying to get into your respiratory tract, right? They need to get into your nose, your mouth, and from there, that's how they go on and initiate infection. So what is very different that we're seeing now is that SARS coronavirus 2 is still ongoing, but the reality is that the other viruses are, for lack of a better term, biting back. And that we're now seeing respiratory syncytial viral cases among the young just skyrocketing. And in tandem with that, we have seen that the rate of influenza viral infections has been the worst in almost, if I'm not mistaken, 30 or 40 years. And this is particularly important for the Black Health Trust, precisely because the data from, for instance, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and whatnot is actually indicating that Black Americans are 3 times as likely to be infected by influenza virus and have deleterious consequences because of that. And for instance, let me show an actual, I guess, Twitter comment that came from this gentleman, Dr. Menza, I believe. And yeah, it's just really detailing that Blacks are getting disproportionately slammed by the influenza virus, which again, this is a viral foe that we deal with every single year, with again the exception being that 2021 and 2021 and 2020 were anomalous in as much as SARS coronavirus 2 was the virus du jour. And the reality is that deaths are higher than they have ever been. But another consequence of that is that these are deaths that could be preventable. And the reason we know this to be the case is because, again, we do have influenza virus vaccines, right? At this point, they're now what are called quadrivalent. Quadrivalent just means that they, they can target 4 different strains of the virus, and in this case, influenza virus, at least the vaccines, they target 2 influenza A strains and they target 2 influenza B strains. But we have seen that the uptake for influenza virus vaccines has typically been in the range of like 30 to 50%, like they're about in this year, for instance, thus far, the influenza vaccination rates are about 30%. So that's something that is contributing to the morbidity and mortality that's ongoing with the influenza virus. Now, I would then turn to SARS coronavirus 2, which even though we're in the 3rd year of the pandemic and everyone has essentially decided to dispense with masking and so forth and so on, the reality is that this pandemic is still ongoing. In the United States, for instance, we are currently dealing with BQ1 and BQ1.1. These are basically offshoots of the BA5 variant. And just to recall to your mind, the BA5 variant is a part of a wider superfamily, if you will, of the Omicron variant that first exploded onto the scene between December of 2021 and January of 2022. And again, going even more macro than that, remember Omicron is a part of the wider SARS coronavirus 2 family that included Delta, Alpha, and then the original parent virus that was identified in Wuhan back in November of 2019. And again, the best defense that we have against SARS coronavirus 2 is, again, getting vaccinated and, again, just leveraging social distancing for your unique situation if, you feel that your health is at risk. But the thing that we're seeing is that most people are not taking masking as seriously when we know that, again, masking still helps. And another aspect is that we are now administering, or at least the U.S. government is has provided updated SARS coronavirus 2 vaccines that do cover BA4, BA5, as well as the original Wuhan parent virus. So those are what are called bivalent boosters. But unfortunately, the uptake rates of those are abysmal for the entire US populace. In fact, it's based off of what I recall from the statistics, about 12.5% for the entire nation of approximately 330 million people. It's 12.5%. So the thing is that we and the Black community need to be mindful of the fact that whenever the nation decides to sneeze, then the Black community is the one that ends up getting knocked completely aside by the flu or SARS coronavirus 2 and whatnot. So again, we need to be armed with the appropriate knowledge to protect ourselves, because again, just getting that shot can save you having to go onto a ventilator or any of a myriad of different things like cognitive decline and what have you. And then another aspect that we're actually seeing is that there's almost a steady stream of deaths that the media and whatnot has almost reconciled itself to, which is a sad thing to like contemplate, but that is the operative reality, right? Because every day I check the COVID-19 caseloads and mortality rates, and the reality is that I've never seen it go below 300 deaths per day. And yeah, I mean, again, there's a like a saying in the Jewish tradition that the death of one individual is as if the loss of an entire world, precisely because you never know what one person could have done. They have family, loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, this is like still an ongoing crisis, but it kind of seems that as time goes on, people just want to move on. And even though the world population may be like mentally done with the virus is far from being done with them. Now switching over, another virus that I guess supposedly caught us off guard is again respiratory syncytial virus. This is another respiratory virus that has its main major impact in the young kids, but it can actually infect anyone at any point in their life. But it's not as dangerous whenever you're older because you have built up the immunity, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, the respiratory syncytial virus cases have spiked to numbers that had been unimaginable. The only upside to that is the fact that the respiratory syncytial virus cases have seemed to started to level off. And the drawback to that is that while the RSV cases are beginning to level off and should see a decline in the coming months, the reality is that it's kind of like a baton being passed, and now influenza virus is taking the baton, because I mean the influenza virus cases have actually started to like explode even back in October. And I mean, I was one of the crazy prepared people who actually, as soon as October hit, I ensured, actually I think it was September, but I ensured that I was double carrying, right? That I had my bivalent COVID like shot in one arm, and then I got my influenza virus shot in the other arm, and that's again how you do it, right? Like kind of like double barrel, double carry, but instead you're double carrying like the immunological protection that you need to protect yourself and your family. Now, again, because I'm basically playing rhetorical hopscotch with all of the viruses that are attacking, now we need to move on to something that I don't know if you guys have actually seen this in the media, but this is something that we in the Black community do need to be mindful of, because again, we tend to get hit the hardest, and this is measles virus. So measles virus is a DNA virus that is probably the most contagious virus on the planet Earth. So in virology, we use a term called R0, which is just an R with like a zero, lower script. And that basically gives us a quantitative or mathematical determination of how likely it is that if someone gets infected with a virus, how many other people are likely to get infected and spread, because again, viral transmission is almost an exponential phenomenon. So the reality is that, let's say for the R0, if I had to guess for SARS coronavirus 2, like probably like for this BQ1 or BQ11 would probably be something around, if I was being generous, I'd say maybe like 3 or 4. Well, for measles virus, it's 12. That's the highest like that we've ever like recorded, right, for any human virus. And all of this bears keeping in mind, precisely because we're seeing, for instance, in Ohio, that measles virus infection rates among children 1 to 2 years old is at the highest it's ever been. And the reason why is because children are not getting vaccinated. And the simple reality is that we know that this works because measles virus is a DNA virus, so they're not as prone to mutate as rapidly as, say, influenza viruses or SARS coronavirus 2. So, and that's why we always have to get these boosters or, like yearly vaccines and whatnot, because again, they're RNA viruses that tend to shift due to what are called point mutations. because the virus is evolving to become better at infecting you. Whereas with DNA viruses, they tend to be a little more, as Dr. Maxey said, chill, in as much as they don't mutate as rapidly. But again, we have had the measles vaccine as a part of the MMR vaccination regimen, measles, mumps, and rubella, for quite some time. So the reality is that it's really a form of negligence to not have these children vaccinated, because we know that this can solve a persistent crisis, and the U.S. government has made this a top priority for decades. But again, at the end of the day, right, we cannot compel people to get vaccinated, but at the same time, we do have to call a spade, which means that, again, it's negligent that these children are not being appropriately vaccinated. Let's see. So beyond that, I would also point out that it's not actually just humans that are suffering the brunt of viral onslaught this year. In fact, believe it or not, like our canine companion friends, dogs, can also get infected with their own form of influenza, and those are like the highest rates that have ever been. And unfortunately, too, looping back to influenza virus, not just humans can get infected with influenza virus, right? Pigs and birds can get infected with their own forms of influenza virus. And one thing that we have seen is that the rates of birds getting infected with influenza virus is at the highest rate that it's ever been. I mean, I think that they've culled something like 50 million or some absurd amount of birds and whatnot. On the one hand, you might say, oh, like, okay, so like birds, chickens, like, okay, like, why do I care? Well, the thing is that what happens is that those birds or pigs often end up being the initial host in which a influenza virus evolves. And then once there's enough contact with humans, what happens is what's called the zoonotic infection, which is just basically the virus learns how to jump from one species to the other. And that is actually what underpinned the 2009 H1N1 influenza virus pandemic. That, again, it was a massive thing. And the reality is that as time goes on, like the tempo of these viral pandemics will only increase as we have to deal with anthropogenic climate change, and the fact that as the Earth's like biosphere and whatnot undergoes all of these rapid shifts, at the end of the day, the virus is just focused on trying to survive, and what it will do to survive is to jump into new hosts and whatnot. So this is something that we have to be mindful of, because again, what starts, say, in a jungle, or what starts with on a chicken farm, does not necessarily always end there. So that's a quick overview of what's going on in the virological world and how that pertains to maintaining the health of the Black community, as detailed and enumerated by the Black Health Trust.
My first word to you, Dr. Despani, is brilliant. And I thank you for this quick, detailed overview of what's going on. And I'm sure we'll have some discussion and question about some of this. Dr. Neighbor, how are you? Are you muted, Dr. Neighbor Stevens?
She is muted. Can we unmute Dr.? There we go.
Hello, everybody. I am so
Hello.
sorry I was tardy. Please forgive me.
Good morning.
Tis the season for forgiveness. Absolutely.
Okay. But I'm wondering if we can start our question with our newest and youngest physician moderator of Dr. Despani and the things that are important. Dr. Hines?
Thank you. I will actually just go right to some of the things that are in the chat. That one of the things that comes up, especially since the last thing we were talking about is measles, is what do you think are some of the barriers still that are keeping new young people from being vaccinated, in particular for measles, mumps, and rubella, right? Like, the old stuff has been debunked about, causing autism, but do you find that is still an active issue? Dr. Neighbor Stevens is saying, yes, it is. Yes. And I've seen people who want to be on these modified vaccination schedules to stretch things out and all that kinds of stuff. But
I want to make a comment about measles before Dr. Despani gives you the answer to the question you asked. I remember having measles as a child. I was about 5. I was sick as a dog. And I think people don't understand how sick children get, or adults for that matter, get when they have these infections. And because we've had the luxury over the last 20 years of most people being vaccinated, there's not a lot of common understanding and knowledge about how dangerous these illnesses are. I've had children that have had encephalopathy from chickenpox, meaning that it affected their brains and as a result of the encephalopathy, had residual deficits in learning and neurologic activity. As I said, when my fever was sky high, I hurt everywhere, and I had this nasty dribble coming out of my nose. Measles was not pleasant. And my children came along before the chickenpox vaccine came along. They all were sick as could be with chickenpox, temps of 103, 104, the blisters then crusting over and being very uncomfortable from head to foot. These diseases should be prevented. And when people make the choice not to get the vaccines, I love what Dr. Despani said earlier about them just being negligent. I almost put something else in the chat to respond to Dr. Clark's question. And I said, well, maybe I should be nice and not say what I really think.
But yeah, definitely. But yeah, at the same time, though, one thing that I hold that is important is that there's the only silly question is the one that's never asked. So I think that right now being that we're both lay people as well as experts, the reality is that expertise is under a critical assault from, again, the forces of misinformation and whatnot. So that should not inspire us as experts to become, like, let's say, reactionary, right? Like react with rage and so forth and so on. But again, like just try to be more understanding and just level with people and, speak to them, to steal a term from a famous president of the United States, in a language that they can easily understand. So so just to follow on, I mean, the reality is that for the, I guess, why the uptake of measles vaccine has not been as high as it can. Like if you're talking about Ohio, for instance, again, we know from, like, say, for instance, like potential representatives, like of the United States, like for instance, Representative Tim Scott, right? That there are, like, Ohio does have to deal with like a myriad of socioeconomic problems, which include, right, barriers to access, precisely because, again, like you're dealing with an opioid epidemic, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if you're like dealing with hollowed out rural or like old, like, I guess, Rust Belt cities that are just like beginning to collapse and become dilapidated, right? Then like many of these people are actually too poor to actually go get the vaccines. And then another aspect is that measles vaccine uptake rates also tend to be low, say, for instance, in the modern Orthodox Jewish community in New York. And that is also because, again, it's negligent, but it also is because they don't have the knowledge and whatnot. So, I mean, again, it just is a matter of reaching out to them in a way that is consonant with the religious values, right? Like I had mentioned, because I myself am Jewish, the reality is that saving a life is the most important mitzvah or like commandment. So it just needs to be like illustrated to like members of the, I'm sorry, it wasn't modern Orthodox, it was Hasidim, right? It was like ultra Orthodox. So basically it has to be that you have to explain it to like in a language that is culturally consonant, right? The same way that like for the Black community that we don't want to be like, told like, oh, like you're like, the reason why you're dying in a disproportionate rates due to influenza virus is because, to steal a term from a sad one from the failed Arizona Senate candidate, Blake Masters, because Black people, frankly, cause these problems and whatnot. It's like, no, like, I mean, you have to speak to people in a language that they understand and something that's consonant with them. And that's why it is also incumbent on us to have, say, healthcare providers who actually are of that culture, like Dr. Hines or Dr. Jordan or Dr. Sherrod, that can like make those people feel like comfortable in their own decisions and skin and so forth and so on, right? So like there's something to be said about socio-cultural like resonance, for lack of a better term. So yeah, so I will gotta take the dog right out, but I shall return in 3 minutes.
Oh, I certainly can relate to that. Could we get Dr. Bean unmuted so that she can contribute her perspective on this, as she is definitely in the trenches in all of this?
Who is Dr. Bean, Dr. Neighbor? Introduce her.
Dr. Bean is my friend who is chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Meharry Medical College. And is an outstanding pediatrician who has roots in California.
And who used to be here and y'all stole her.
And while we're getting Dr. Bean unmuted, Dr. Jordan had his hand up, so maybe we can put him on deck, in the on deck circle.
All right, now I'll be off in about an hour. I love you too. Bye-bye.
I don't see Dr. Bean unmuted as yet. You want to go ahead, Dr. Jordan?
Sure. I had chickenpox and measles also, so I can echo what Dr. Neighbor Stephen was saying. It was not fun. And we're still at this point where we need to take this from just us to the community. And I think we missed the Congressional Black Caucus this year, but we need to have a spot next year. Or for 13 years before COVID, I spoke every year to the Congressional Black Caucus staff on HIV. We need to do something to infiltrate the Congressional Black Caucus more, the NMA more, and where we can make recommendations to them to get people to get vaccinated. It makes no sense now that we have these things. We've had them for years. And then we got Black folks complaining and we're not getting vaccinated, particularly measles, mumps. That really makes no sense. But I think we need to do something to forge a better relationship with the Congressional Black Caucus. We could come in one weekend and have a meeting, and that's not hard to do. I know I did it before we had the whole COVID thing, but it was just for HIV. But I think we need to do something to take the knowledge from out of just ourselves back to the masses, because they're not getting it.
Well, Dr. Jordan, that's very important, and that we should do the Congressional Black Caucus. But I'm even more excited that the leader, the minority leader in the Congress, is now Hakeem Jeffries.
Yes.
There's a good chance that he could end up being the speaker. So we need to follow those directions that you're given and put something together. But I have a practical question too to ask you, Dr. Spanning. My wife just asked me, she said, I haven't been vaccinated and boosted since late July, early August. And but she had all the vaccinations and all the boosters. Of everything that's out there now, what should she do?
And so just to clarify, so she has had her primary series for the COVID as well as both doses of the booster.
Correct.
Yeah. And when was the last time she had her new bivalent booster?
Late July.
Late July. How old is she?
She'll kill me, but she's over 21.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason why, yeah, I mean, I know that people tend to get very, I guess, evasive about their age and whatnot, but the reality is that at the end of the day, right, like people actually age at different rates biologically speaking, right? I mean, I've actually done like these biomarker studies, and I'm actually much younger than my actual chronological age. So the reason why I mentioned that is because
Let me say this, Dr. Despain. I took her to a party once,
Mhm.
and the host asked me which one of my daughters was I bringing with me. Her.
Yeah. So the reason why I mentioned that is because, again, as I mentioned in the prior talk, right, the reality is that those who are older, like their immune system tends to be less effective at generating like the T cells and B cells that serve as the sentinels to protect our bodies. And because of that, one must be mindful that even if you get like boosted and whatnot, your like protection from that will wane like the older that you are, and that's called immunosenescence. And that's actually a big problem that's happening with the zero COVID policies in place in the People's Republic of China right now, for instance. Other than they're also like for those who are 80 or older there's only 40% vaccine uptake. But yeah, with regards to getting back to your colleague, the reality is that, yeah, I mean, everything is good in terms of, getting boosted and whatnot. So again, like, it's just, again, like being able to what I call strategically social distance, like as necessary, where if, you like find out that somebody in your circle is sick, then you probably want to stay away from them for a little bit. And also masking is like still a viable strategy. In fact, I saw that COVID cases are increasing so prodigiously in California that there actually is the first inklings of a push towards bringing back like masking standards and public places. So yes, I mean, those are the thing. Again, like the most important thing is vaccination. After that, then you start to, like focus, your line of sight on other strategies. But yeah, so I would say that that's probably the best strategy for her now, because again, you don't want to just keep getting like shots and shots and shots of COVID, because at some point they're actually diminishing returns for like keeping your immune system active.
Dr. Despain, before we move from that question, is there an age, like, because there's probably a lot of people on this call that are in that scenario, right? You had your original, you had your whole primary series, you had your 2 boosters, now what, right? Is there a point at which your recommendation might change to something, all else being equal? Obviously, if people have different comorbidities, all those kinds of things, but let's just say based on age, right? Is there a point at which your recommendation might change to something else? Like, at this age, maybe you might lean more towards, a different, more aggressive plan or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So everything that I've seen is that it typically will be in greater than or equal to 60 is where you start to get more aggressive and whatnot. Also, I have to give and erratum because like when I was earlier speaking about R naught for measles virus, I think I accidentally said that it's a R with a superscript, and it actually is a subscript. So I apologize. Typically, one of my superpowers is that I have associative thinking. So that's why I can talk about very complex concepts so quickly, but at the same time, I move very quickly. And then another aspect that I actually did not get the chance to mention, but that this is something that was brought up by Miss Linda Minter, is that there actually is another viral foe that we do need to be mindful of, and that actually is what's called varicella zoster virus. And varicella zoster is just the technical virological term for chickenpox. And I think we all know chickenpox can be quite a horrific thing. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, if you get chickenpox, then like you can't be in school, and you develop these, like cutaneous skin lesions and so forth and so on. And typically for most people, that is the end of it. But the reality is that for a subset of the human population, they will actually end up developing shingles. And the reason why this is the case is that herpes viruses actually have this very pernicious mechanism where when they infect you, they actually then take their genome, right? Because remember, we have genomes too, right? It's what makes us human, right? So they have genomes too. And what they do is they actually take their genome when they infect the cell, and they keep it outside of our DNA, but it always is going to be carried every time your cells divide and whatnot. It just stays like with you, and it's called CCC, like DNA, which basically means covalently closed circular DNA, or episome for short. And basically, just like you get your genes passed from your grandparents to your parents to your grandchildren and so forth and so on, like yeah, like the viruses do that with you too. And that's just how herpes virus does it. And that is actually why people can have shingles manifestations after so long, because let's say they're exposed to, like, say, some ultraviolet radiation, or alternatively they're exposed to like some stress or some type of thing that suppresses their immune system, and then all of a sudden, like the herpes virus, in this case the varicella zoster virus, just decides to like explode back into view. And like that's the same case too for like mononucleosis, which is caused by another herpes virus, which I believe is Epstein-Barr virus. And yeah, I mean, it can be pretty painful, right? It's actually debilitating to have like shingles and whatnot. So the reality is that we have now developed vaccines against varicella zoster. And I guess the interesting thing is that there's a 2-dosage shot, and what is being asked is like, okay, say I've taken the old shot, should I actually take the new shot? And just to clarify, the difference between the old chickenpox or shingles vaccine is that was actually what's called a live attenuated virus. So basically, it's a virus that we have, quote unquote, there's no regular way I can say this in a layperson way, but we passage the virus, or basically what we do is we just keep growing the virus again and again. And for some viruses, they actually get weaker as they go through these passages, and that is what's called attenuated. So what happened with the original version of the shingles vaccine is that was just like an actual live virus that was just weakened, right? And we do have other cases of that, like polio virus, like some of those are live attenuated, but that actually was discontinued in the United States. So now they've actually, I believe in 2015 or 2017, I would imagine it would be 2017, they came up with this new shingles vaccine, and that shingles vaccine actually only uses a protein subunit of within the actual virus. So really, that's actually safer than to deal with live attenuated viruses, because we have seen, for instance, like with polio virus, like when we do use the live attenuated virus, I mean, it can immunize you, but then the problem is that we do see in some of the wastewater for polio virus that they can actually recombine and become pathogenic again. And that's actually why there was a gentleman in New York City that a few months ago was paralyzed by polio. But yeah, so with regards to this new shingles 2-dose vaccine, it's safer. And with regards to whether this person should get the new one if they had the old one, I would again, I have a PhD, not an MD. So I would like just err on the theoretical side by saying that DNA viruses don't mutate as rapidly as RNA viruses. And then secondly, though, it also would not like hurt, like because again, this new protein subunit shingles vaccine is actually it's safer. It's not an actual weakened virus. It's actually just like one subunit, like a building block of the virus.
So let me ask you
Why
a,
not get an antibody level just to see if they have any?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, do you think that
The CDC has a thing on this. I'll put this specific question, and I'll put it in the chat. I'll put the link to it in the chat.
okay.
so here's a question. We recognize that we all ought to have a primary care physician. By the way, Dr. Walks, I have a primary care internist now. I took
Okay.
the word of Dr. Wilbert Jordan, and I actually have an internist taking care of me. I'm no longer my own physician.
You backing away from the whole physician heal thyself thing?
Right. So that's crazy. They say if anybody's their own doctor, they got an idiot for a doctor or something like that. But anyway, Dr. Spanish, I've talked with my internist, and for Dr. Hines and Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, she told me and has been giving me advice on how to handle the problems I have and what I need in terms of vaccination. So, Dr. Spanish, now that I have my internist and I'm going to discuss everything with her, do we think that people who have not been recently vaccinated or boosted since July of this year, August, ought to be discussing with their physicians, taking the bivalent or booster or the Evishield? What should they be discussing with their primary care doctor?
Definitely probably not Evishield. Yeah, that's not going to work anymore. Because of BQ1 and BQ1.1, a lot of those, so I learned the names. I learned the generic names because, again, like manufacturers and companies can actually go out of business, so I don't bother with like the trade names or whatever. So I would imagine that Evishield might be the Betolimab, I guess. But yeah, everything I've seen in the scientific literature is that BQ1 and BQ11 have actually just completely obviated like pretty much almost all like monoclonal antibodies against SARS coronavirus 2. If you were talking to an internist, I would see if there actually is some other like antibody of last resort for SARS coronavirus 2. But again, like these, like the immune evasiveness is going crazy with these latest variants. But definitely, you would probably talk about getting boosted, again, potentially. But again, that has to be on a one-to-one basis with your clinician. And they would do that on a case-by-case basis, because again, like you would have to, figure out like, okay, like, should I, like, am I overstimulating, for lack of a better term? Not even overstimulating, but am I basically just getting a shot that's actually not going to like do anything to my immune system, or alternatively, like, will that actually be good? And I think at the end of the day, right, we do need to factor in immunosenescence. So like for older individuals, like just re-revving that immune system might work, but for like a younger person, that would be totally contraindicated, just like from an immunological perspective. But definitely it has to be, in a dialogue with one's clinician.
Well, thank you. Dr. Walsh, any thoughts?
Yeah, Dr. Maxey. I think that the question you asked Dr. Hispani, I would just add to Dr. Hispani's answer, if I could be so bold. I think the answer to should I discuss this with my internist is really always yes. If there's some healthcare medical question that you have, the answer is always yes. Of course, you let your doctor know what you're thinking about, what your concerns are. I think one of the challenges now is that most of the doctors aren't Dr. Dispani, so they're not going to know as much about the viruses and the vaccines and the mutations and what have you, unless they're really keeping on top of things and reading and trying to make sure they have a resource to go to understand. So I think by all of us asking our primary care provider those kinds of questions, it may prompt them to continue to stay current because things are indeed changing. So back to where Dr. Wilbur Jordan started, everybody needs to have a primary care doctor. Moving on to where you are, Dr. Maxey, with having an internist, then with the information Dr. Despani gives us, yeah, you need to talk with your doctor and make sure your doctor's current. And then the last point on this is almost everything is on the internet. Now, I'm not talking about, Wendy's website and Charlie's chat room. I'm talking about the JAMA, which we've quoted earlier, the places where we can get credible information. And so a lot of times you may read an article and not really understand all of it, but you could take that article to your doc or send it to your doc. I have patients sometimes that'll send me something that they've read, which I'm not really excited about having more homework, but at the same time, I think that it gives your doctor an indication that you are concerned and that you're willing to do a little bit of research, a little bit of reading, and then have that conversation with them. So that's my thought on that.
That's an idea, but they could also direct their doctor to look at the YouTube of Black Health Trust. We have so much good information.
We do. It's actually, it always amazes me how much is in the Black Health Trust archives from experts, from not just from somebody who thought they would talk about something, but from people who really know a lot about these topics. I don't know if we were able to get Dr. Excelina Bean, if we were able to get her to come back and unmute. Dr. Maxey, can I take us back a few minutes to something we talked about earlier? Because
Sure.
Tony Wofford put in the chat about getting together with let me look at it carefully, getting together with the CDC, the HHS, and others. When we're talking about vaccination rates, 100 years ago, when I was the chief health officer and Washington, D.C. had a vaccination rate in kids of about 49%, we did a vaccination program and took it up to 99%. And the way we did that is by following an existing law that said, if you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't come to school. It's amazing how many parents don't want to keep their kids at home, and managed to everybody got their kids vaccinated so that they could go to school. So I think there are two things I would say for that. One is make sure that your local school district is enforcing whatever vaccination rules there are, because sometimes they just don't do that. And then number two, you can reach out to your state, county, or city health officer and get that individual to make sure that people are following the public health guidelines for your jurisdiction. So it is possible at the local level by calling someone who you either vote for or who was appointed by somebody you'd vote for, and you did vote for, and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't know what the vaccination rates are. Can you tell me what they are in our city, county, state? And is there a reason why we don't have higher vaccination rates? And can you all start enforcing the law? Because most jurisdictions, I think, do have vaccination requirements for kids to go to school.
Thank you, Dr. Walks. So another thing I've been concerned about, there have been several reports in the literature about how COVID, particularly long COVID, and some of these viruses in general and diseases in general can affect our brains and our cognitive ability. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on some of those articles that have been out that we need to let our audience be aware of. That's Neighbor Stevens, Dr. Hines, Dr. Walks, Dr. Despani.
My thought on the articles that I've read so far, they are early articles. A lot of them are observational, digesting the experience that we have had over the 2 years, the observations and the comments are seem reasonable. But as I said last week, and I've said several times before, we're at the beginning of this, not at the end. And I think as time goes on, more and more information it's going to come out. Having said that, to me, it only makes sense that the body is a whole. And when you have major infections causing organ damage, there is no way you could even ever think that the brain would be excluded from the experience. So I think we're on to something. I think it's still early.
Excellent.
Dr. Maxey, before we get too far away from the topic we were on a bit ago, Tony Wofford wanted to be unmuted to make a comment.
Good. And I
And
had a wonderful conversation with Mr. Warford just the other day. So
And we need Dr. Bean.
is she back?
She never left. We never got her unmuted.
Okay, if we can unmute Dr. Bean and we can unmute Tony Wofford and whoever we can unmute first, then we can unmute the other one, please.
Well, this is Tony, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
I absolutely agree with Dr. Jordan. You know, I was fortunate to do a major HIV/AIDS panel with Dr. Jordan, was supportive at SC, which actually was televised all over the world, actually, of C-SPAN, where we did the cost and casualty of silence HIV in Black America. And I think Dr. Jordan is right on point. I mean, now more so than ever, if you guys want to put together a group to go to DC right now to talk to the minority leader, which is going to be Jeffries, which to talk to Secretary of HHF, Becerra, and the CBC, I think now is a time no more than ever, because COVID exposed for those that didn't want to face the reality of Black people being disproportionately impacted by every disease state known to man. And it's only going to happen if, in fact, you guys go there and raise some hell. You know, what you said, power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will. Unless you guys go there with an actual demand and an ask, this is all cool, but you got to have an ask to come with it. And I think that's where the ask is going to come from. It's going to come from DC. It ain't going to come from us. And I'm not trying to downplay what you guys are doing by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes you got to go raise some hell where the money and where it's actually happening to move the needle. And I would encourage you guys, and take a couple of community folk that actually have been disproportionately impacted and dying, because there's no way in the world that you can have constituents that's there talking to members, talking to these congressional members. And again, we ain't gonna have our juice too long, though. We just lost house. We ain't gonna have juice too long. So you better squeeze a lemon while you can.
Mr. Warford, the only
Yeah.
word I disagree when you said you guys, it should be us with you.
Oh, I just got back from DC talking to Maxine, and I'm headed to New York actually on Wednesday to meet with Reverend Sharp, because I believe I ain't wrote no papers and no white papers. I ain't firm through nothing. I just do heavy lifting, man. And I would be more, again, as I said this before, you guys, I would want to do whatever it is I need to do, because my house knows reasonable. I ain't trying to get published or nothing like that. I'm trying to save Black people.
Well, thank you so much.
Amen.
We're gonna
Thank
go
you.
Well said.
with you. Is Dr. Bean unmuted yet? Is she still with us?
Now I don't see her.
I've been calling her cell phone number, so she may not be able to unmute. So just looking forward to other sessions. I want to thank Dr. Jordan.
Dr. Maxey, I'm sorry, Dr. Jordan is waving his hand at you.
Okay, Dr. Jordan. Is he able to unmute?
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this would be a good time for us to meet with or look at the NMA colloquium as a time when we can all go to DC and really make a statement. We need to look at 2 or 3 issues. I mean, certainly improving and encouraging people to get vaccinated is one, but 2, having us as experts with the NMA going to Capitol Hill. You know, you've been president, so you know there's always a visit one day to Capitol Hill. And I think, to me, one of the weaknesses of that has been sometimes people don't go plan. We need to go with a plan to do it. Not just, I'm getting a chance to meet with Maxine, so now I'm gonna ask for what I want. That's not what we need to do. We need to go with a plan, so whomever sees whomever, the same thing is said to them. But we've got a great thing here, but we've got to get out of this bubble to do things to make an impact on Black folks. We still have too many Black folks doing things as if nothing was around, period. We have, if you're watching TV, we have PEP and PrEP now. We have HIV meds now. Still, I see patients in my office who just got infected. I had 2 young women last week. I had a young woman 3 weeks ago. Why are you still doing things to get you HIV infected when every commercial nearly is about PrEP on TV? So I'm not questioning what you do. I'm not putting a judgment on what you do. But damn it, if you're gonna do it, take a pill or take a shot. There's no reason for you to alter your life to risk having something, because I cannot tell you and you cannot tell me what's going to happen if you become HIV positive, how long you will be able to stay healthy with that. We don't know. But if you took PrEP or PrEP, if you took PrEP, you wouldn't become HIV positive. And the groups out there that need to be taking it, I'm Black folks. We're doing, as a group, we're not doing what we need to be doing as much as we need to. And if Tony Waite is still on, tell him to call me tomorrow, because I need to talk to him about something too. But I think we need to become more proactive in terms of things we do. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I was about to say, thank you so much to Dr. Jordan Despani for, again, giving this time and giving us such a excellent education on what's new and what's going on. And for next week, we have Miss Frances Tillery, who is a nutritionist, a dietitian for a company called DaVita, where she handles some of the sickest patients that have end-stage renal disease. But she's going to talk to us about eating proclivities that we have, including things like Beyond Meat and some of the things that Dr. Jazzy Jordan talked about last week. Following that, we have a program. We're going to continue on our series talking about brain health with Dr. Tony Brown, who does transcranial neurostimulation and looks at the blood flow in the brain and how that affects your health and recovery. There's one gentleman who just got a $100 million grant from Mark Zuckerberg to study aphasia in African Americans after they have a stroke. So we've got exciting things coming. And Dr. Neighbor, I think you have somebody coming up too. Am I right?
That's not final yet. So let me not speak to that until I get a confirmation.
Okay. Are there any other questions in the chat, doctors? Okay, then we'll ask for final words from our co-moderators, Dr. Hines.
That was the rousing discussion, and I appreciate very much the context and the reminders about different communities, right? Like we're not in a monolith. The things that are challenging or barriers in one community are not necessarily the challenges and barriers of another community. Especially when it comes to ideas on vaccinations and why different groups are moving in different ways. So I appreciate that reminder.
Well, thank
you, Dr. Despani, for always sharing your knowledge and time with us.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask, before I go to the other two co-moderators, Dr. Despani, any final words you'd like to leave us with?
Make sure that you're always protected, right? I mean, there's a saying in the Bible that it's better to be a a living dog than a dead lion. And it's the same thing here, right? Where you can't, like, the reality is that life is aimed at, like, living, right? The dead can't glorify God. So it's the same thing. Like, you can't go and be a physician. You can't kiss your grandbaby. You can't, like, I don't know, like, whatever, like, go play Frisbee. You can't do anything if you're infirm or you're dead. I mean, it's that simple. I don't know how to make it any more simplistic. And again, it just benefits everyone.
I like that saying. I'd rather be a live dog than a dead lion. That's cool. Dr. Walks.
Dr. Maxey, one of the things I'll say about today's meeting is that there's a lot of information in the chat. Folks have put links in there and other things for us to go and look at. And I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to that. And maybe we have to figure out how do we, when we archive the Black Health Trust program, I don't know that the links in the chat get archived along with it. So maybe we need to think about how we would do that, because there is a lot of information there.
Simon, do you have any comment on that question?
That's it, Simon. Stay quiet. You're doing enough.
No, I'm not used to pushing my unmute button. We do have records of all the links in the chat logs, but they are only self-contained within our Zoom account. So if anybody would like to get one from a specific episode, then they could message us on Facebook or leave a comment on that specific video. I do get those links, and just leave an email and I'll do my best to get whatever links you may need.
All right.
I think Dr. Clark has her hand up, Dr. Maxey.
Okay, Dr. Clark.
Okay, there's a little button, a little page down at the end of the chat, and actually I've been trying to get this to work. If you click on it, it allows you to, it's supposed to allow the ability to have you to download it maybe to your Google Drive, but it asks me for a code. So it's a process in doing it, and I haven't been successful in doing it yet, but maybe we can figure out that process. That might be something that would help us along the fact. Okay, so.
It's actually I know what you're talking about. It's disabled, but I guess we could go ahead and turn it on so people could go ahead and access it without having to reach out, or maybe they forget, or it's just in the moment they want to access it. So I can make that available from here on out, because as of now it's disabled to where you can't download anything.
So that's
important.
Thank you.
We had a interesting security incident 1.5 years ago, and ever since then we've been completely on lockdown, so to speak.
Yes, I remember that day. So before we go to Dr. Neighbors-Stevens, are there any of our medical advisory or anybody online that wants to make a final comment on today's topics?
I do have a comment. I kind of want to address when we were talking about, I think the question was, or maybe the comment, do brain viruses affect the brain, or in some aspect of that? And I do know that it does affect the brains, but the effect it has on mental health is another link that I sure we'll probably talk about coming up. We start talking about brain health, because really when you start talking about mental health, what you're really addressing is brain health, because the brain is not functioning for a reason. And I don't think we do a good enough job of really trying to figure out what that is and why that person is thinking and acting the way they are. They're doing that for a reason. And it's not just Uncle Ray Ray, it's Cray Cray.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of sessions on that, mostly how those behaviors are affected by blood flow. If you look back on the Black Health Trust by lectures we had by Dr. Jehudi, and also, what was the name of the doctor you brought on, Dr. Walks from Columbia?
Well, Dr. Lawson has also talked about that.
Right. So we have done quite a bit.
Dr. Cottrell is the one you're thinking of, Dr. Maxey.
Correct.
Dr. Cottrell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cottrell.
So if
I
we
get
look
those.
back on that and catch up, but we're gonna do more. And I said, Dr. Tony Brown is coming on later in this month to talk about some of those issues. Dr. Neighbor Stevens, did you buy me something?
Of course I did. So let everybody know, I was late because I was running late at the grocery store. And so that's what he's referring to. I want to, I thought about this actually while I was at the grocery store, since I was running late. I think we should remind our audience of our time change that's upcoming so that people don't think that we are no longer broadcasting.
Yes. Go
Dr.
ahead. Yeah, we want to move our time back by 30 minutes, starting with our meeting on January, our first meeting in January.
I thought it
And-
was an hour.
Yeah, it is an hour.
It's an hour, Dr. Maxey.
That's the time of the program, but the time difference is going to be moved back by 30 minutes to 12:30 Pacific, 2:30 Central, and 3:30 Eastern. That's the time change. But we're also going to limit our broadcast time to 1 hour instead of an hour and a half. And we'll see how successful that is.
One question, Dr. Gibson has a query.
Dr. Gibson?
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate the august contribution of Dr. Despani, and I'm really thrilled about the exchange today of all this information. You can easily click on those links, by the way, that you see in the chat. They will go to your browser. Then that way you can come back to the Black Health Trust presentation just by clicking the Zoom button on the bottom of your toolbar, on the bottom of the screen. So you click on the links in the chat, and they will bring up the articles in your browser, Safari, whatever that you might, Firefox that you might use. Then you can come back to the session by clicking on the Zoom button at the bottom of your screen. Additionally, I have to say, I would be remiss if I didn't say, as a pharmacist, it's extremely important for us to be mindful of what is known as a vaccine schedule. That's cradle to grave protection for folks against all these, many of these contagious diseases that we are confronted with. So it's very, very, I think, useful for us, especially when it comes to things like HPV with the young people and preventing cancer later in life. And also adults, grown folk, get your Shingrix vaccine. That's the gold standard for the shingles, because that can save you a lot of grief, because the post-herpetic neuropathy, or that shingles lesions that folks have during shingles, can come back to bite you. So you want to make sure that you're protected with shingles vaccine, along with all the others in your yellow tablet. Maybe some of us remember those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want you doctors and scientists in the pharmaceutical industry to talk to us one day, especially to me, about vaccines that are inhaled and not coming through a needle sticking in your arm. That's for me. I think there's even more efficacy with those technologies. So we want to—
Sounds like a medical advisory session.
Sounds like it. All right. That's Neighbor Stephen. You have anything else?
No, I think we have had a vigorous conversation. I think our audience knows that we need to continue to monitor our community viral levels and continue to wash your hands and wear your mask and watch where you go.
Amen.
All right. Thanks everybody for attending. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next week.
Good day, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Simon.
Bye.
Thank you, Simon.